Hello, if you need a little bit of help completing the homework, this is my first helper video, which is going to give you a way of thinking about the problem. So whenever you're writing a new program, the first thing to do is to decide what you want it to do. Here I've pasted the problem that your homework assignment was right here so that I can sort of read it step by step. And as I read it, I'm going to translate it into an English language algorithm. We talked about this in the first week. So it says modify guess my number. Well, I'm not going to modify it, I'm just going to write it from scratch. So it said ask player 1 to guess the number. Okay, so that's asking a question, and you know how to do that with JOptionPaint or Scanner. So I'll ask a question. And the question is guess a number. Okay, then ask player 2 to guess the number. So I'll ask another question, which is guess a number. Whoever guessed closest is the winner. Okay, so I have a hint about that in a minute, but let's go backwards and decide what do we actually need to do in order to ask a question. Well, if you remember your JOptionPaint from before, we got to create some variables. So at the top, I'm going to create a text variable that will hold their answer. And because they're guessing numbers, I'll also need some int variables. So I'll call it num1 and num2. Alright, so now we just need to translate each of these things into Java. So remember, every single time you ask a question, that's going to translate into a single JOptionPaint statement. So I'll say text equals JOptionPaint, show input dialog, guess the number. You're not necessarily supposed to remember this right now. That's why you have all your notes and your old programs. So all you need to remember is, oh yeah, I know how to ask the user a question. And then you write down the steps in English like this. And then when it actually comes time to write the Java, you go back and you look at an example of how do I actually ask a question. And then you just change the bits that matter for your program. So you're changing the question they're asking, and you're using the variable that you created to save the answer. Okay, well, since it's a number, I know I also need to translate their answer inside the text variable into a number. So I'll say num1 equals integer.parseInt text. And there I've asked my first question. You can do that same process for this second question. Alright, so now the question is, who guessed the closest? Well, wait, who guessed the closest to what? Oh yeah, it's the secret number, right? It's a competition to see who can guess the closest to the secret number. So if I'm going to do that, I know I also need a secret number. So I'll create that variable at the top. I'm going to make my secret number 7. Alright, so now I need to see who guessed the closest. So in my handout, I had some advice for this. I said you can find the distance somebody guessed away from the secret number using the absolute value. So I have this code that's like literally right in your assignment. So distance1 equals math.abs is absolute value. And I'm going to do the absolute value between player 1's guess and the secret number. So if the secret is 7 and player 1 guessed 8, this distance would be 1 because they guessed 1 away. If the secret number was 7 and they guessed 10, then that distance would be 3 because they guessed 3 numbers away. So now let's do distance 2. And this is the distance between the second guess and the secret number. I don't actually have a num2 yet, that's why it's complaining, but you would fill that in here. Alright, so we have to figure out who guessed the closest. Well, if this calculates how far away each person's guess was, the person who guessed the closest must have the smallest distance. And you know how to ask questions using if statements, so I can say if one distance is smaller than the other one, then I can print out a message that says somebody won. And if it's the other way around, if somebody else's is smaller, then I can print out a different message. So it's like I want to test for each possible thing that might happen. If the first player's distance is smaller, then I want to print that the first player wins. If the second player's distance is smaller, then I would want to print that the second player wins. So that's the idea. Let's just go back and make sure we're doing all the things that it wants us to do. we're supposed to display what the secret number actually was and have it display both guesses and who won. Okay, well, so for who won, we need to actually check with an if statement. To display what the actual number was and what the guesses were, we don't need if statements. We can just do that. So system.out.println, and here we would display like the secret number was whatever, and then here we would print out what both people's guesses were. So player 1 guessed, and then display what their guess was, and then we'll do player 2 guessed and display what their guess was. So now I'm doing all the parts of the problem. To go back, I have asked a question right here. I've asked player 2 to guess a number. You'd fill that in there. I had to pause and go back to make sure I created enough variables to let me do this. Then I calculated whose guess was closest to my secret number. So to do that, I needed to make a secret number. Then I can use absolute value to find how far away each guess was. And then I print out all the things I'm supposed to be printing, like what did people guess and what was the actual number. And then to figure out who won, I have to test each person. I say if the first person's distance was smaller, then they won, so I should print that player 1 won. If the second player's distance was smaller, then I'll print out that they won. Okay, good luck.